Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have another conversation with Pearl Gregor and myself, Marisa Goudy. Before we started recording, Pearl just said that she knows enough to be dangerous, except with dream work. And I don't have the exact quote of it you said, but essentially that you've gone a lot deeper there. So I'm wondering, what's the alternative? We know that phrase, I know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
Is it that you know enough to be safe in the realm of dream work, or you know enough to not even worry about the danger in the realm of dream?
Well, in the realm of dreams, there's no duality, so there is no opposite.
Mm, right.
It's just everything is connected. Sometimes danger is good.
Hmm.
I mean, when I say I know enough to be dangerous, I'm simply saying, okay, I've got a lot more to learn about that.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a lot more to learn, for example, about the eighth chakra that we were talking about, or the
Hmm.
eighth dimension.
Hmm.
Um, And when we opened the conversation, we had a conversation, ladies and gentlemen, about mice,
Yes.
a mouse, about ants,
Hmm.
about the crow. Now, you say to yourself, what? What are those women on about? Ants, mice, the crow. And so, what are we on about, Marissa? What are we on about?
I think what would unified our conversation before, in which the word that's coming to me right now is this idea of pests, this idea of the animals we like to judge. You
Yeah,
don't judge the eagle. You
no,
don't judge the dolphin.
no,
There are certain animals we have grown to see as noble. The great stag is different than those damn does who are out there eating your flower bush.
yeah,
And I think, again, it comes right to that idea of duality, which is such a hallmark of our waking world, of our contemporary society. This or that, good or bad.
yeah, this or that is good or bad. And everything is connected. I think when I look, I'm reading your work and I looked at it again this morning, and I picked out a sentence that, well, not a whole sentence, but the digital web. The two
Mm.
words jumped out at me. And I thought to myself, that digital web is all connected.
Right, right.
That ant
Hmm.
is connected to the great white stag.
Mm.
Now,
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
understand how exactly,
Mm.
except
Mm.
the universe is connected.
Mm.
And when you talk maiden mother, or I talk maiden mother crone, you talk princess queen and
Wise woman.
wise woman. That always stumps me right there. Maybe I've got a lot to learn about a wise woman.
Mm.
But the princess, the queen, and the wise woman are very connected. They're they're all connected. I
Always.
have a princess in me, I have a queen in me, I have a wise woman in me, and I have an ant in me.
Hmm.
I have a dream that showed up with a mouse.
Hmm.
How do I get all those characters in me as a dreamer?
Mm.
I mean, I don't know the answers to very much of this stuff, but we're entering a completely different age, I think. And I'm very hopeful that this digital web that you write about, that and you talk about becoming more collaborative, more cooperative, more collegial. And I think, well, yes, that seems to me we started quite seriously on that because let's face it, the Western world was very much monopolized by Christianity for a very long time,
Hmm. Hmm.
and one form of Christianity. But we're now beginning to realize that digital web connects us not only to the ant, the white stag, but also to every religious tradition in the world.
Mm. You know, I can't help but notice, and if you saying, digital web, of course, that phrase comes through because we're thinking of our 21st century lives. And as a woman in my 40s, I've come of age in this digital realm, and it's certainly shaped my consciousness. Yet I remember what it was like before. That need to mention, right? It's not just, the spider's web. It's not just, Ariadne's. It's not just Arachne. It's that digital web. But of course, and I would love to look up the etymology of, well, digit, like our original digits are our fingers, and that sense of course, webs are woven by legs and hands and fingers and knitting needles. And this reminds me, I think the last time you and I talked, there was a quote you had from your book about knitting. And I remember we got off our call and said, oh, that was something that I wanted to bring up. So clearly, this wants to recur for us in this idea of weaving and knitting. So let me find that. But I don't, do you know anything about the origin of digit and digital and how that came
Well,
through?
I'm
I don't know.
thinking of that, and what popped right into my mind is the handless maiden.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
it's such a powerful myth in the world of the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, although I'm not so sure the world understands this very well, I think the digital web is the coming together of the hand. The hand does the weaving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
without the
Mm-hmm.
hands, you're not weaving, you're not knitting,
Mm-hmm.
you're not creating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we're creating with the digital web and what we're right now, the digits, we need those digits, and they're not numbers. They're
Right.
the fingers that we need to weave with.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. It reminds me of another dream, that digital web. It's called the global brain, if I remember. And I
Yes.
don't know.
I was just reading about that one.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
and that dream was so uncanny
Mm.
because in the dream, I'm carrying a book under my arm, and I don't have to go into the whole dream, but years later, that dream was in the 90s somewhere. I go to the University of Alberta 2005, and I register for a doctoral program. I'm 60 years old. I'm clearly the oldest person in classes, older than most of the professors. And there's the first day I'm in a complexity science class. And the instructor says, you're going to need these books. And he picks up this book, and it's by Peter Russell, I think, and it's The Global Brain. And it's the very same image on the cover of that book.
Right. Right.
And I kind of stare at him. I never did tell Brent that, how did you pick that book out of my dreams? From 15 years ago. We
Right.
are all connected.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the Celtic world knew that, Marisa. When you talk about the Celtic world in your work, the Celtic world knew that. We are only coming to know the Celtic world since, maybe in the 40s, at least in this part of the world. The Celtic world knew the Celtic world, but
Right.
the Roman world tried to wipe it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. The digital web is the web. It is Ariadne.
Right.
It is every creature on the planet is necessary for something.
Mm.
And I don't think mankind has got a good grip on that, because he is not the most necessary one. We
Right.
seem to think that we rank ahead of, we want a new subdivision, we move in, we flatten the place, we do whatever we need to do because we need houses.
Right.
We forget to know how many houses we just destroyed.
Yes. Yes. What keeps coming to me is this sense that when I arrived at and found Celtic wisdom, Celtic spirituality, that way of being, it was at once learning an entire system and a sense of really coming home. And that sense of like this, however it works with lineages and soul groups and just the voices of the ancestors and the voices of the guides, it always just made sense to me, to the degree that I find it like constantly having to try to put voice to the ineffable, because it's that sense of, you don't necessarily want to be as limited with, you either get it or you don't, because of course we all want to keep deepening and growing and expanding and coming to new understandings. But at the same time, this sense of everything is interconnected. It's all woven together. I mean, I think we forget it at moments when we're raging because, there's ants in the house and the kids aren't listening. And why don't I feel perfect today? I took my vitamins, everything should be grand. But that sense of, if you look within and you kind of ask, is everything connected? I almost want to say, well, either you have a yes or you have a no. I think ultimately is, if you ask that question, you're going to recognize, I've got a yes.
Yeah.
By asking the question, you already have opened yourself up to the answer.
Asking the question, honestly, I don't think there's any more important phrase in the English language, or even important word, than question.
Mm. Mm.
I would not be sitting here talking to you if I hadn't asked a couple of questions around why I was so depressed. Why have I been depressed my whole life?
Right.
What is wrong with me? Well, of course, then the girlfriend says, Pearl, wrong question.
Mm. Mm.
What's wrong with what you believe?
Oh, wow.
Well, that'll sit you back on your heels a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the question I think we're asking with the digital web. And the same question you were asking about a sense of coming home. Well, where is home?
Right.
We know intuitively where home is.
Mm-hmm.
But what isn't? Well, it isn't a place. I mean, what is home? I seriously think that home is where I can be myself.
Right.
That's really, if you can't be yourself at home, you're really in trouble.
Right.
But then who am I when I'm home?
Mm-hmm.
It just is a never ending sort of question that.
And you know where that brings me is that, I mean, it's the most cliched sampler you ever do see. Home is where the heart is, right?
Yeah.
And you just want to look at that and say, oh, great auntie, whomever, or, great grandma must have had a lovely time sitting by the fire, stitching that. Too bad she never thought any deep thoughts. If only she'd written a book.
Yeah.
And it's that sense of, I know for me right now, the deep journey is this sense of, we were speaking before about chakras and thinking about that shift into the heart space for me. And knowing that, my own mystery school teacher talks a lot about the fact that we've been moving from the solar plexus for a long time. We were taught to have our locus of energy at that power center that says, do, go, drive, push, gold, gold, gold.
Right.
And the movement happening, upward and deepening to the heart and to that sense again of connection, to bring that word through again. But I know for my own personal journey, it's been a lot more of moving out of purely trying to see everything, trying to intuit, trying to perceive, think my way through everything, and sinking it into my heart. And it is at once a deep sense of home, and it's more foreign than I sometimes want to admit. Because of course I have deep love for so many people, places, things, ideas, but wait, have I really been living from that space and embodying the language that I can spin out so easily from my mind and from my mouth?
And you said from going to the heart, from wherever we're at. And there's another cliche about the longest journey you will ever take is the distance from your head to your heart.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What is it, 12 inches?
Yes, right.
That's a long,
Right.
long journey.
Less if you're hunched because you spend too much time on the digital web.
With your nose in the computer keyboard. And then you have to go against so many other pushes. You have to go against that. Answer. I need more answers, when in fact I need more questions. Because unless I have a question, the answers are kind of irrelevant. They just keep piling up. So,
right. And answers are supposed to be so final, questions bring us on a quest.
The door on all kinds of things. They in fact, well, they just do. And Doris Lessing says it's the hardest thing in the world to maintain an undissident or a dissident opinion, in the face of a group. It is the hardest thing in the world to maintain a dissident opinion in a group. And so we are part of a group. So here we are, a couple of women with a bit of a different opinion than most of the world, or at least the world that I know. I mean, Marisa, are you watching the Olympics? And the women in the Olympics.
Right. Yep.
Look how difficult it is for those women. I don't have the names in front of me.
Right.
To maintain their right to say no.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That in the face of all the Olympic Committee, and maybe not all, but in the face of huge groups of people. And here we are trying to maintain a different opinion in the face of a patriarchy that says, well, who are you to talk? Shh, be silent. Be submissive. You know, just never mind the digital web. That's very male oriented or very masculine. And are you sure you belong there? Well, you know, I mean, there's just, it's never ending weaving and knitting. And I think that goes back to that metaphor that you used several minutes back. What are we weaving? What are we knitting? And the digits. I think the digits is actually a pretty cool question. I mean, the hand of the maiden might be one thing, but look how long it took her to regrow her hands. And perhaps that's what we're doing, is regrowing our hands.
Right. Yeah. Here's that line from your book, from knitting is symbolic of creation. The real problem, striving to live according to old conceptions of the feminine while disintegrating. The patriarchy will not honor a woman's time. The feminine is only seen in terms of materiality, physicality. And I feel like this adds a whole other level of complexity to what we've been saying here, in that sense of the feminine is only seen in terms of materiality, physicality. We're talking in relation to the digital web, which is of course something you cannot touch unless you're holding your iPad does not give you the digital web.
It is very mysterious, very ineffable, that web. I mean, where is it?
Right.
It's in the ethers.
Right.
That whole, read that quote again.
Knitting is symbolic of creation. The real problem, striving to live according to old conceptions of the feminine while disintegrating. The patriarchy will not honor a woman's time. The feminine is only seen in terms of materiality, physicality.
The key word in that whole thing is disintegration. What has to disintegrate in me while I'm creating something new? Where because I mean, I have to, and I'm an old woman. What another myth comes to mind is the old woman weaving the world. An old woman is weaving the world. And we need to honor her weaving, because it's a whole different world that's being created through that digital web. It looks to me like where we're going to have connectedness. It's going to be a paradigm of connection, not a paradigm of separation. It's going to be a paradigm of sustainability, not exploitation. I mean, we have spent time out of mind in exploitation.
Right.
I mean, we've even exploited the ants. I don't know where they're supposed to live, not in your dog dish, apparently.
No, the cats get very cranky.
Yeah, they get really, it's even the cats don't want them around. And, you know, so, and we're trying to create transformation, not inertia.
Right.
So while we're working towards a new creation, we're disintegrating. That's the work of the feminine.
Yeah.
I think we haven't given the feminine much credit for disintegration.
Well, of course, that scares us the most because within the power of the feminine is the ability to birth and also to destroy. To say we hold both birth and death within us. Life and death come always in equal measure, and not necessarily according to the church's time or, the way it ought to be.
And I think you're absolutely right. We like to honor the creative aspect of the feminine. The disintegration aspect we're not quite so fond of.
Right,
Compost
right.
actually reeks.
Well, so does a woman during a certain time of the month.
You bet.
Send her away. Put her in the tent.
Although women used to go and be together in that certain time during their menses, because that's when they were spinning their webs. That's when they were creating. We know, and actually that's kind of funny, but we won't go down that road. It's I had this other thought going off, and as befits an older person, sometimes the train has left the station and it's just gone. The train went off, the thought went, oh, disintegration. I'm sitting on the banks of a river in Banff, Alberta. It's 1993. I can remember it so well. And there's been this great conference called Creating a Caring and Equitable Society. Now, isn't that profound? Nell Noddings is the featured speaker. If you're familiar with Nell Noddings' work on ethic of care.
No.
Well, it's profound. She was well read in education circles in Alberta. I don't know about other parts of the world. In any case, the discussion has been around, are you ready for this? The pink cover of her book. The pink cover of Nell Noddings' book, An Ethic of Care. There are a number of people, gender irrelevant, I think, who do not believe that it is appropriate to have a pink cover at a conference where there are men and women. And I'm puzzled.
Right.
I mean, in fact, I'm thinking, this is insane. Do I really care what color the cover of this book is?
Right.
And I'm sitting on the bank of the river, and flying by me it's May 1st, maybe April 30th, dead animals in the river, trees rooted up, flying down the river. The river is high. It's just running madly. And I think that is the perfect metaphor for the feminine. Destruction. By the time that gets to the Delta, many, many, many miles from Banff, Alberta, it will be the best silt and soil ground up, mesmerized, pulverized, and created into the most rich, deep, black soil imaginable. Okay, that is the feminine. Without the destruction, you do not have the creation.
Right.
And I think we have got a lot of work to do with women with everyone around the notion of as we're working, parts of us are disintegrating. Belief systems. You've read my first book. How many belief systems have I undone? I mean, Inanna is the goddess of disintegration. She really is. She doesn't mess around.
Yeah.
I mean, if it needs destroyed, she's destroyed it. It's done. It's ground into small bits and pulverized and made into something new. It's a mortar and pestle, which is an image. You know that windsock flying behind the witch. She's sitting there. She's got her mortar, but she's not a witch. She's a woman. She's creating. We are witches, and we're creating. Anyway, that's a long saga off into creation.
Well,
Production.
It makes me just recognize, of course, that if So in the book, I talk a bit, well, Julia Kristeva talks of women's time, right? And
Yes.
her offering of that sense of, rather than our logical linear chunk, 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 chunk perspective of history that has been foisted upon us, in
Yes.
many ways, it comes to that recognition, of course, of the cycles of all things.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is contained within the female body, that is contained within Mother Nature herself. And that part of the human obsession over the last several thousand years has been a denial of the seasons and cycles that we invariably live in, no matter what. And of course, now that we live in an age where, beef and spinach come wrapped in plastic, there's no concept of time, and there's no, of course, you living much closer to the land than so many, there is you're viscerally involved in that process. But for the vast majority, there are no seasons other than, well, do I need to wear a sweater today or not? And we've been taught to and been enabled to live without that kind of awareness. And that's what makes this, I talk about it as sovereign time, and that sense of really shifting our relationship with age, with our space in life, with who we are meant to be based on the color of our hair or the, suppleness of our skin, that we've been sold that by the same system that tells us that cycles don't really exist, time doesn't really exist, let's just wrap it up in plastic or slather some retinol on it and it'll all go away.
Yeah.
And the madness of that paradox we're constantly living in, when we're also embodied in forms and cells that are constantly dying and regenerating, and whether to be regenerated again or not, because that's naturally part of aging.
The naturally part of aging. I love that phrase, because that is a phrase, along with disintegration, that, I mean, how many times have you been told, oh, 30 is the, or 40 is the new 30, or whatever? It's like, oh, spare me.
Right. Right.
I'm living my 30s to the max, and I'm hoping to live my 40s to the max. And for me, I'm hoping to live my 80s to the max.
Right.
And
Right.
but I know I'm losing skin. I know my hair is white. I know I'm dying. And I was born dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's just perfectly well what you've explained, is like, we have been in a linear, rational, but it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
It
Right.
really isn't working. I mean,
Right.
your Celtic knot, St. Brigid, they knew what we have to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to remember it in the cycle and the seasons. Women, I mean, we've been silenced. The feminine, not just women, but the feminine, the
Mm-hmm.
artists, the philosophers, the musicians. Oh, we celebrate the really, 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 really great ones if they follow our rules. But the labyrinth is where, I mean, it's really the labyrinth that is, we are in the labyrinth. It
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
one way in and one way out of the labyrinth. We're not in a maze. We're not in this puzzle that we've been thinking we're in.
There is question after question after question, and there is no answer other than follow each question and you'll follow the way through this particular journey.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a powerful, powerful thing. And it is the story structure. It is the way we write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I remember you said in one of your emails that you had read Unless.
Yes.
What did you make of Unless in the Labyrinth?
Oh, yes. So yes, Carol Shields' novel, Unless. I just finished it the other night. I ended up listening to it because I listen to most of my fiction. And it was, so the woman in the book would have been exactly my mother's age. So it was
Yes.
very interesting to read what is a different form of feminism than I have come of age up and through. And there was moments in which I could completely understand where she was coming from, and yet that was not my struggle.
No.
So that was very intriguing, just in terms of feeling as I was sitting with my mother's friends and sitting,
Yeah.
but the other piece that I found so important was that it was very consciously a very circular book about writing. It was
Yeah.
about a woman's experience, but it was she reflected, I am a writer writing about writing, having a hard time getting her writing done. If I add one more layer, it'll be utter madness. And of course, the other layers we're reading about it, it goes on and on and on. And that sense of um, beautiful self-consciousness, which I think is the work of women's circles. And it's the work of really being grounded in this sense of, I am fully in this form. And I also have a vision of what it might be like for you to see me in this form and me to give it back to you and to reflect back and forth and back and forth and on and on and on, which I think is so different than, as part of this book, she's writing these, whether real or imagined, letters to these men of letters. And she's constantly upset with how they've ignored, haven't included any women in the canon, or, refused to acknowledge that beings with ovaries could ever possibly compose something or be interested in reading about others with ovaries. But in a separation, a counterpoint from the great male artists who merely create as this act of, well, Yeats was always fond of calling it sprezzatura, which was supposed to be making all creation look utterly effortless and having everything appear as if a grand gesture that came out fully formed. And I think that is really antithetical to how women create, in this sense of, I'm making this, it's messy. What do you see? I see this. Let's fold this in. You need more blue. Let's fold in the blue. Oh my goodness. When you mix that with the red, it makes purple. We've made something new together, or because I created alongside you, there's something that was born.
I mean, that book, it wasn't, she never once used the word feminist or feminism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was life. It was her life as a writer, as a mother. I mean, what were you thinking when you saw the Muslim woman immolate herself on the street corner? I mean, that to me was the central metaphor of that whole book. The fact that it was a Muslim woman. And to me, I used that book in my dissertation as my dream data, my analysis, my data for analysis. And so her daughter, having read Madame Bovary, disappears and sits on the street corner with a sign says goodness. Now, speaking of going against or having a dissident opinion, she sat on the street corner with a sign that said goodness, and everybody tried to figure out, why is she doing this? Well, you need to just go and get her and bring her home. I mean, there were all manner of just great answers to the parents. Just go bring her home. Well, that just isn't going to work. Anyway, Roman, the main character who always was going to hold this, he just had he had enough. What was the word she used? Had enough heaviness, isn't the right word, but enough gravitas.
Gravitas, yeah.
To be the central character. But her central character, a lady, woman, just didn't have sufficient gravitas.
Right.
I mean, I break into laughter at that very word.
Yeah.
I mean, unless if anybody's listening to this podcast, go down and get the book.
Yes.
And read it, because it's a lovely read. It's not deep and heavy and all that, but it is very deep.
Right. And it's about the nature of writing itself and whether it is heavy and what is heft. I mean, that in of itself, what is gravitas? What are we allowed to love and be called to?
And what makes a good novel? What makes a great book, a great work? Well,
Right.
it has to have a central male character.
Does it?
Yes, it must, because they are the only ones with sufficient gravitas.
Right, right, right.
You had to
May we
laugh.
all build the book around the phallus in the center.
Yes, of the great Mr. What was it? Mr. Springer. I got a kick out of even his name.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Anyway, we probably need to leave this for now.
Yes, I will drop that link to that book so others can check it out. I've been sharing it constantly ever since you shared it with me. I've recommended to 2 different women in this past week. So it feels like it's one of those books that just goes hand to hand. Hey, you need this one. Try this one.
Canadian Carol Shields was a great Canadian writer, and she lived in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is not the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And she wrote many, many books, and was well loved in the country as an amazing author. And I don't know how she died, and before I even did my dissertation, but she certainly was a great writer, great woman writer.
Right. And that's the whole other question we probably will discuss at another time as to whether or not the woman within that phrase wants to be parenthetical and silent or wants to be said aloud, because I think that is certainly a question that maybe shifts with each decade and is, I think, still allowed to be a really interesting question that still draws us in.
If we don't know the ancestors, we don't know ourselves.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, thank you, Pearl, for yet another brilliant conversation. Deeply grateful.
I enjoy our conversations
every time.